Hello everybody, my name is Christian Quick and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about our first advanced block class, which is going to be covering the onPlaced method. A method is an action of something that happens, and since we're talking about onPlaced is the action, and we can make something happen after we place the block. Like that. Alright, welcome back to the code. So let's make a new block. So I'm going to copy block because my block has some transparent textures in it, so I need to have that non-opaque. So I'm going to call this onPlaced. You can call this whatever you want. I'm just calling this because it's the method we're going to be talking about, onPlaced. And then inside of this we have new block. So you'll notice that all of them say blocks because they're all just basic blocks. If I double shift here and I go and look up blocks, include non-project files, and then we have our the net.minecraft blocks, we can see how we have a block and we have dropper block, we have power rail block, stairs block, pillar block. These are all advanced because they all have their unique classes, and all of those classes in some way or form have to come back to block, which is the most basic form. So if I go into pillar block and I middle mouse button click on this, it's going to say extends block because it has all of basically block's information, and it's extending meaning it's block plus everything that we decide to put in here. So even if I go to dropper block, because this is a much more advanced one, so dropper block extends the dispenser block, so it's the dispenser block plus all this. And a dispenser block is a block with an entity with all of this code in it. A block with an entity is simply extending block, and then we have this thing called an implement. We'll work on those later. But you can see that basically no matter what, they have to somehow come back to block, and that is the most basic form. So we're just making more than it's simple plus. So how do we make this simple plus block? So if I say that I want to change this to what we'll be calling this onPlaced, it's going to be red. And if I go on it, it's going to say, hey, cannot resolve simple onPlaced. Well, create class called onPlaced? Well, actually, that is what I would want to do. I'm going to hit cancel because that's not how you're going to want to do it. I would go into your blocks here, and you're going to right click. We're going to do new Java class, and this is how you would want to write your new class name. We'll just do onPlace. It might be placed. I'm not too sure. I think it is placed. It's okay. If you ever mess up the name, you can just click and then go to refactor and then go up to rename, and then I can just add a D at the end, refactor, and it's perfectly fine. Oh, there we go. So here now it's saying expected arguments, expected 0 arguments, but found 1. This is because, well, this has stuff in here, and right now there's nothing inside of it, because what I need to do is I need to extend block. Because if it's not taking from a block, what is onPlaced? What is my class? It's the extra of nothing if nothing's here. So another thing, that now that I have this, I have block, but it says there's no default constructor available, so it says constructor matching super. Now in most cases you're always going to want to do this. So these are obviously called your block settings, and it's settings.create, and then you have all of your settings on here. If these settings were blank, right? If this was all blank, then inside of your code, this would have to be blank for this to work, like so, kind of like that. And you can tell how now suddenly it says there's no parameters, and then, well, it's going to cause issues because you are going to want those settings on there, because then it's not really a block if it doesn't have the block settings. But that is just kind of how these read. We'll talk about how to add them and how to make custom ones, but right now that's a completely different lesson, so we'll just kind of come on here. So there are going to be some methods that I teach you that are in the base code, and some that are add-ons that are used in the code but aren't direct. And what I mean by this is, let's say I wanted to make an explosion, so I can say explode, explode. Okay, I'm just gonna put it in the L because I keep spelling it wrong. Oh, no, I'm spelling it right. Let's say I want to make an explosion method, and here it says the methods are onDestroyed by explosion and should drop items on explosion. Well, those are good methods that could be extended onto the block, but this doesn't let me explode the block. Well, well, that's unfortunate. But if I was to make a class called explode, I could do that, but we'll talk about that later. What we're going to be typing in is onPlaced, and this one actually exists. So once we use it, we can say enter, and it should put in all of the code in for us. It's going to make a super, which as far as I know, super does is it basically takes all the information you don't have or you don't use, and it just kind of fills it in with like default information, so the game kind of knows what to do with it. So basically, onPlaced, or the method, is the action. The action of me placing down a block in the world. And as basic as that sounds, there is a lot of things that are involved when such action happens. And you can tell how advanced some or more things that are involved based on how many things are in these little parentheses here. So when I place something, I have to place something in the world. There has to be block position that it gets put on. It's asking, is there more than one state that when I place it? There needs to be a living entity that is involved, because in this, the variable is called the placer. So something has to place the block, whether that be an enderman or a player. And then the item stack. So when I place the block, there's one that gets taken out of the inventory. So you have 63 items, you place one down, you now have 62. So those are all the things that get involved. Now, every time I want to do something in here, you do not actually have to use all of these, but you do need to you need to have at least one of them. You can use what's called specification code. We'll talk about that in a later tutorial. I know that there's a lot of things that I'm saying right now that we'll push on later, but this is the very beginning. This is the first advanced block class, and eventually I'll get into all that stuff. I'm sorry if this is like in super good detail in a sense, but this is you got to be big brain with me, and you got to be a little patient. So let's say I want to have something, give an effect, right? How I have to ask myself, when I want a thing to do, this everything in here, everything in here is the result of, but to have that result happen, it is the result or the after effect of this action happening. So I place down the block, and I need to say that if I want an effect to be given as the result, I need to somehow basically slap my code onto whatever was involved. So can I give the effect to the world? No, because in this case, the results, that wouldn't make sense. You can't give an effect to a block position. You want to give it to the player per se. If I say placer dot add a status effect, and then I said new status effect instance, and then there's status effects dot, and then I can say invisibility, and then I can do this. I know this is really long. We're not really going to be talking about adding effects because of just everything that gets involved. But basically, what I'm going to be talking about is we now have this placer. But this is going to add it both to an enderman if an enderman was to place this block, or a player if a player was to face this block. Specification code is basically making an if statement, and if I say if placer instance of, and then I can say player entity, and then I can say player, I can then turn this placer into player, and it will now add it to the player. But that is instance. We'll get into also more of this later. But that is generally if you wanted to give an effect. So the main idea that I'm trying to teach you at this point is basically if you want something to happen, you have to think about what's involved, and then after you have what you're involved. So originally we called this placer. There is the specifics of are you done with that basic, or do you want to get down to the nit and gritty and like really get really basic with what your stuff is, So let's say the second thing I want to have is I want something to explode. So am I when I explode something, I want to place down the block, and then I want that block to explode. So what is involved in an explosion? Is it that the player is exploding? Is the item stack exploding? These two don't make any sense whatsoever. When an explosion happens, it explodes in the world. So if I basically just say world dot, and then let's say I forgot, I can see it right here, create explosion. But if you forget what something is called, you can just start writing explosion, and you can see how even though I didn't write create at the beginning, it knows what I'm talking about. What's also really cool about some methods is that some of the methods have multiple versions. So basically this says that if I want to make an explosion, I need to have these things involved. But let's say I didn't have this explosion source type, right? Then I could go down here and then I could do this explosion behavior, and I can actually have a method where I have some of that other stuff. We'll see this more, and you'll get more exposed to this. But we're actually going to be using this first one, so I'm going to hit enter, and now it's going to say, "Hey, look at all this. Uh, these things need to be fulfilled." Because if I just hit the parentheses here and I hover over this now, it's going to say cannot resolve method here. Candidates for method call world are, and then a candidate is basically all of the things that are involved or are required to be said for this action to occur. So now we have basically a method inside of a method. Because if I middle mouse button click on here and I click on it, you'll notice that it's in that yellow writing. And that's mainly what coding is it's an action. The action is it's creating an explosion, and it's creating the explosion when I place the block. So it's an action and an action. But this second time, this action, this candidate here, is a smaller version. So let's just kind of read the code here, and it says that I need the an entity double 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 float and explosion source type. An entity is I already know what this is talking about, so it just needs something that's an entity. And we have living entity. Now, is an entity a living entity, or is a living entity an entity? We're going to be talking about that in hierarchy, which once again, future video. I think that's actually going to be the next one, so don't feel too bad on it. But there's all that. So I could just say that the entity is the placer. So to create an explosion, you basically need to say whose fault is it, and it's the placer's fault. So then it basically says, I want a bunch of doubles. So it's got double, double, double. A double is simply a number, right? Because what it basically is saying is, I need the x, y, and z of where this is placing. So if I say 0, 100, 0, it is going to take these coordinates in the world, and it's going to put it there. Now, this is very impractical. What most people are going to do is that they're going to use block position, and it's usually called pos, little pos. And what most people will do is they'll say position dot get x, and then they'll do position dot get y, and then they'll do this one called position dot get z. And this is basically saying that I have the block now placed, and I want to basically take the block position. So I place it at coordinate 124, and then I paste it at 76, and then 148. It doesn't matter what the coordinates are. It's basically saying get that number and place it right there. And it's copying whatever the position is from here, and it's going to paste it right in there. So it's getting it and placing it right there. So we're almost done here. Now, if I it says that it wants a float. A float is basically a number. So if I said 500, it's basically saying, it says power. This is talking about how strong you want your explosion to be. Now, you can make this number basically as big as you want, but I would suggest keeping it to smaller numbers because, one, your game might crash if you give it way too big numbers, and I would suggest no higher than 180. If you want a big explosion, I would suggest no bigger than 180. Now, my computer can hold much bigger things, like bigger numbers. But what'll happen is your game needs to process everything that's going on. So when an explosion happens, you know that when the block explodes, it tries and drops the block. And if I make the bigger explosion, it's more math that the computer has to handle. So if I say 500, it's going to take everything with that 500 power radius, and it's going to have to calculate, does the block break? Will it drop the block? Is an entity involved? How much damage is it doing into that entity? So the smaller the number, the lesser. I mean, even if I just did 10, 10 is a big enough explosion, trust me. If you don't know about power levels, I think the wiki still exists. I think I saw something, actually notification saying the wiki was gone. But I don't care. I'm going to say check the wiki. If not, just test it out. Just see and figure out how big you want something to be. So I think 10's a big number. It might even just be too big considering I'm just making explosions. If I want to be ridiculous, we can make it 50. Like I said, no bigger than 180. Otherwise, once you start crossing 180, your game's gonna start lagging. So I prefer not to do that. And then let's see what this last parameter is. So if I just hover over it, explosion source type. So when it is in caps here, usually, if you do not know what something is, you can either double shift and use like explosion source type, and I can hit enter, and then it says an enum. So you can usually look up what you're doing, but if you don't really know, like let's say it took me to something useless, this is actually pretty helpful. When it's an enum. Enums basically means that you actually just type it out, and then it's going to tell you what the types are. So is the explosion type a block? Is it a mob? Is it none? Is it TNT? And I think this is saying that it's going to say that you're exploded by. We're going to say block because you're exploded by a block, but it might say that, you you're exploded by with. I don't really know how to explain the death messages. But now all of the candidates are fulfilled. So if we come down and we click on it, we use all of the capital letters, and then we have the entity, double, 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 float, and then the world explosion type. So now we have our explosion. Now, something that I've learned with experience is that when you do this, it's going to create something called ghost blocks. So sometimes you have to ask yourself, is anything that is done in the world is usually server side. Anything that's done on your screen and all of your internals is your client side. And if there is ever a debate between the two of them, you're going to see this a lot. You're going to have if, and then you can say world.isClient, and either you want this to be true or you're going to want this to be false. In this case, you're going to want this to be false. This is specification code, because I can say if this, or I could say, if like placer dot, has status effect. So only if you have a certain effect will it create an explosion. If I put it in there, control like this, and then I can say has status effect, and I can say status effects dot, let's say speed. So oh, I don't know why I put comma, and so now it's going to basically say if the world is client and the placer has speed, it's going to world.explosion, and it's going to do this. So let's restart the world, or just start it up if it's your first time, and let's see what these two things are doing here. All right, I don't trust. I like my beautiful world. I spent a lot on the terraforming, so we're just gonna create a new world. If you know you're gonna be doing something dangerous, always do it in another world. There's no reason to just massacre the world that you know and love so well. So just leave the world you know just fine. It'll be fine. But here we are. We're in a great world. And then if you remember to put in your item groups and stuff, here we're going to look up our onPlaced, and here we go. So if I place it on the ground, as soon as I place it, oh, there's a little bit of lag. Oh wait, it's not lag. I don't have the speed effect. Because remember I said if the placer has speed. So let's give ourselves a speed potion. Swiftness, sorry, that's what it's called. Let's break this. So now we have speed. So now if I place it, boom, that happened pretty quickly. So that's what I did. Uh, specification code is really interesting when you get used to it and stuff like that. But you can... Oh, I wasn't expecting a little cavern here. Oh, Monster Hunter. Well, that's because I was the place that was involved. I'm just messing around at this point. Usually I like to show the explosion because a lot of people like to... They like to play with this one. And I do admit this is a really fun one to have. Um... Oh yeah. It's a really fun one to have, I can admit. Oh yeah. Because then you start looking at your sightseeing and the world of destruction. But if you want to know what happens, how do I know if my world is lagging? If you ever notice that entities stop moving, something that is flowing down, like not the actual animation, but see how the blocks are like spreading around. If that stops, entities stop. If you put in a command and the command doesn't go through, yeah, those are good symptoms that your world is lagging if you set something too large. But as you can tell, it's not too bad. I set it to 50 just for good measure. Let's do one more. Let's do one more thing. To have it when I place a block. So we know that if the world is client, that is just there so that you don't have ghost blocks. If you don't want to know what ghost blocks are, they're just basically blocks that they don't look like they're there, but the server thinks they're there. So you start like your player kind of like starts fighting, colliding with them. It's annoying, but it basically, we did see how it says, and the placer has the status effect speed. Then, once I've met all the requirements, it will then fulfill everything in here. So I didn't have speed, and so since I didn't fully have all the requirements in here, it just ignored this, and it'll just keep going and says super, nothing. So now let's make another if you want there to be another specification, you can do that by saying all the things, and then you have to call something up here that is getting involved. So these big things are your classes, or yeah, these are the classes, and then these are the little words are your variables. And I think actually you can, for the sake, sometimes when your classes don't mix up, I think you can actually call this like player. And here you can see that it doesn't mess up the word. It'll mess up these, but then I can call this player, player, player. When you're making your own stuff, it does kind of make sense. It'll make sense why we would want to do this. But if I change this living entity, the class, and I just change this to entity, suddenly this goes gray because it doesn't like that. It needs to be a living entity. If I import the class and say that it's net Minecraft entity, it doesn't fix it. So it does need to be living entity for this to work, and it's now that orange. So if it is gray, it simply means it's not being used, and then if it is like this, it is being used. So it's being used by the Minecraft basically part. It's part of the block settings, because you have your, well, block settings, and then you have your settings, because these actually are called your abstract block settings that create. And these kind of settings are basically all of these, but all of your other settings outside of that is basically everything else. So if I scroll, I think if I scroll up, I think I'm going the wrong direction. Nope, here we go. So like get sides, get camera collision, get this, top surface, world surface. It's a lot of stuff. Neighboring updates, random tick. These are all going to be all of the stuff that we're going to be generally going through. There's obviously going to be some that I am skipping over, but these are all of the classes. This one's going to be really fun on Projectile Hit. I'm excited for that one. But coming back to our onPlaced class before I get distracted. If there is nothing that you want to specifically announce, then you do not have to put it in there at all. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to want to say, I want to basically summon an entity. And you can do this a couple of ways. Let's try and place, let's do block position. So let's have it so that I can say world dot, if I say set block state, and then it's going to say position, what is the state, and then it says int flags and stuff like that. You don't actually have to, since these two, this bottom one doesn't require these ones, then I don't actually have to take them at all. I can say pause state like this. So you might say that, hey, this code is fulfilled. You know, it doesn't tell me there's any errors, but what do I do now? So now we can actually add specifications if we wanted to. So if I say dot, so there's the position, and then here I have all of the stuff that I can add onto. Right now, let's keep this here. So state. Basically, I want to set the block state, and I want to say the position, and if I keep this default, it's going to set the position that I placed at. And then state, let's say I wanted the block to replace it to be an iron block. So I can say, like, if I said dot, right, and it says get block is of, sometimes I'll be like, well, this has the parameters of block, so is that what I'm looking for? So I'll hit tab, and then I'll type in blocks dot, and then I can say, like, iron block, and now the whole thing is red. It's now telling me I have provided a boolean and not a block state. So sometimes this happens. This kind of comes with experience. Now this has nothing to do. Well, I don't want to say nothing to do with Java, but this kind of comes down to knowing your Minecraft code. So you're gonna need to call for blocks dot iron block dot, and then if I say get default state, it is talking about the block state. So now if I place it, it should set the block to be iron block. Let's reset the world and see so far if it's working just the way we intended to. And here we are. I have my onPlaced block. So as long as I don't have speed, I'm not going to explode. But I want to place down this block, and I want to instantly replace with an iron block, because that's what I said to set the block. So I place it, and it turned into an iron block. Good. So far, it is doing exactly what I want it to do. All right. So let's talk about the little semicolon at the end here. The semicolon is the ending of a command, meaning that I'm going to type out all the code that I want, and I want to tell it to do one thing. When that one thing is fully fulfilled, I need to end it saying, I have ended my one task for you. If I have two tasks, I would not suggest trying to put two tasks behind a semicolon. So let's say I want to put an iron block on top of this iron block. Instead of saying position, like position, and then be like, and position dot, get up, I'm going to have a lot of errors, and most likely the answer is it's not going to work. What is better to do is I can control D and copy it. So now what this code is basically saying is when I place it, it's going to complete every command from top to bottom. So it's going to world set the block to an iron block, and then it's going, now that it is an iron block, it's going to world set the block position to an iron block again. So what I can do this to the second one is I can say dot up, and it will now do world dot set position to an iron block, and then the next one it will say world dot on top of that, when I place it, put another iron block. So let's control D. So now if I say up and I go dot and then I say east and then I control D and I say dot west, an iron block, you can I wonder if you can see what I'm doing here. We can also do like this, and then what we're going to do is we're going to do dot up, and then we could say one of two things. Dot up, or if I said control D, dot up, what is it, dot up in distance. If I say like up 2, I think that just means go up 2 blocks. So if not, it might be 1, because Java starts at 0, so sometimes my numbers mess up. But basically, let's say it is 1 for every. So these would actually be the same, because let's say I wanted to place a block 10 blocks above it, right? And I wrote this as 10. Writing it with the integer would be a lot better than going like this. Dot up 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, you get the point. Your code's going to look really long. For this case, I'm only going to be writing it the once, so I don't think it's, it's perfectly fine to just write it twice like this. But I'm going to change this blocks right here to carved pumpkin. So now it is going to take it's going to world set the block state to iron block, and then it's going to set the block on top of that iron block to that, and then on the east and west side of that top block that we have, it's going to put iron blocks, and then on top of the top block, it's going to put a carved pumpkin. If you don't know what I've done here, I basically made it make an iron golem shape. So if I put in down here, really, I have it place on top, west, and then let's get a carved pumpkin here. I want to not summon the golem, that's why I'm doing it like this. So I basically said up. Let's turn it to the side so we can actually read it. So this first one is saying the position. So the same one is this. This second one, blocks.up, is talking about this one. Then we have our east and west. So this one and this one, I would assume. You can always tell by going in your F3 screen, and it says I'm facing north. So if I go over here, this is our east block, and if I go over here, you can see that this would be our west block, and then on top, it's going to put down our up, which would be our carved pumpkin. So let's get rid of this and make this summon an iron golem. So we're going to restart our code and see if this summons all of it, and because it all happens at the same time, it should just summon the iron golem through set block state. Alright, here we go. So if I break all of these and I place it, bam, look at that. It even gave me the advancement because I am the placer of all those blocks technically, according to the code. And I think that is because, like I said, if you do not fulfill all of the information, it's going to put default information for you in the background where you don't see it, and it's basically going to say that I placed all those blocks, and as long as I placed that pumpkin, which technically I just placed this block, I got the hired help. But now I have a block that summons iron golems. But there's one problem with this block. One, I coded it in an inefficient way. However, it does sort of work. And by sort of, I mean that if you didn't know, for an iron golem to spawn, there needs to be nothing in these four corners. So if I ever have something in these four corners, it will not work. And the same applies for our block here. You can see that this is what it basically placed, and it did not summon our iron golem, and oh no, what do we do now? Well, we could just kinda... It broke in. Alright, so this would be the quotes improper way to summon an entity. There are much better ways to summon an entity. There are much better ways to build things as well. But, I mean, honestly, sometimes when I'm lazy or I have a small thing that I'm building, sometimes the little code does actually help. But, how would I summon an entity? Now, this is going to use a little bit of some brain work here. So, when I spawn an entity, the placer does place the entity, but what is actually involved is in the world. So I can say world dot, and then I can say entity, and here is everything that the world can do with all these types of entities. I can get the closest one. I know it says spawn entity. I can add block entity, place sound from entity, remove block entity. Okay, some of these are block entities, which is really annoying, but it's fine. Spawn entity would be what we're looking for. But then we have the class, or actually our parameter, so everything on the inside. So we have the class that is coming from and the variable. And it does not match any of the things that we have. The closest thing we have is the player here, but unfortunately, you don't want to summon yourself. That will definitely... I'm not going to even try it. I know that'll crash, because you cannot summon a player. But then it's like entity, and then it's got entity here. And what's frustrating about this is like, so normally you would have to do like one of these two things. Either you have to call the class, or you're gonna have to call it from the variable. So if I say entity, well, unfortunately there's nothing in here that I can call the variable. And when there's nothing that you can do to call the variable, then you have to call the class. But if I say entity, right? Just like how they did, and I say dot, and then I want to say like iron golem. It's not in there. Now I don't know if you noticed it, but there's entity, and it's called entity type. Why did they change the name like this, where like this is called entity, but then this down here is called entity type? I have no idea. So we have entity type, and then we have iron golem, and it says, you know, if I was to go over it, well, I put in an entity, and it says the require type is an entity, and you've provided an entity type. Well, then what am I? Then what am I supposed to do? You know, it doesn't give you clear explanation, but if I just say dot create, actually, it actually tells you all the things that you can do. But you want to do dot create because this one up here, this one is super advanced. So like, let's say I wanted to do this second one on here. Look at all of the things that I would have to put in. It's ridiculous. But this top one, it just says world, world. And what's really good about this is that inside of this world, I actually have a world at the top. It's our first parameter. And so all I have to type in is the variable, and then suddenly it should be good. So let's hit in the comma, and now it says there is nothing wrong with the code. So if there's nothing wrong with the code, let's see if it works. Oh, and to make sure that we're creating the golem this way, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit the I'm gonna do /, and then I'm gonna do a star, and it's gonna probably make a couple errors. I'm going to go to the last line of code and then hit enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to take all of this code in here, and it's now going to make it gray. And gray just simply means it is not being used. So if you have code and you want to save it, this is a good way to do it. If it's one line of code like this, double /. But if it's a couple of lines, you're going to want to use the stars. All right, here we are in our beautiful world. And if I place it, it did not work. Well, that's really unfortunate because it told me that the code was perfect. And if it was perfect, then why did it not spawn? So it appears that we have done everything right, yet it still did not go right. Why is that so? Well, there's actually 2 lines of code that we also need to write in order to spawn an entity. And the first thing is that we are going to have to declare what we're doing. So if I want an iron golem entity, we're going to label an iron golem entity. So we're making a specification class. And so let's say that we can call this, we could call this like iron golem entity, iron golem. Sometimes when I make a variable, I like to make the variable what it's doing. So that way I can sort of copy and paste it and make it generic. So right, I could call this the summoning, and then I can say entity like this, and then I want to say equals, and then if I just take this entity type out of here, like this, Control C, and then Control V, and then we're gonna put a little thing at the end here, and then we're gonna make this called the summoning entity. That is the first thing that we are gonna want to do. And normally, when you're making compressive code, you would want to close this, but these need to be 2 separate lines because it wants an entity, and this is the entity, but it needs to require the entity type and also needs to be declared by the world. So this is like a little, think of it like this equals is a bridge. So this half is talking to the method, while this half is talking to this method. And so it needs a line of code so that it says this equals this, and so now the code understands. So once I have these 2 lines here, if I try and summon the world, it's still not going to work, and you might say, why? Well, it needs to understand that the summoning is the last thing that happens. Another thing that needs to happen is it needs to know where the entity is going. So here I could say the summoning entity dot refresh position and angles, and then what I can do is say position, and it's going to say the block position that I'm placing it at. Float yaw. I think yaw is talking about the head position. I could be completely wrong. I'm not too sure how to define yaw, but float is basically a number. When it says float, it is actually a decimal number. I can say 1 as a whole number and then go with it, but usually when they're talking about a float, usually floats are coded between 0.0 and it goes all the way to 1 itself. So if I set it to 1, 1 is usually the highest. It really depends on how they code it. In most cases that I've seen, float is usually from 0.0 to 1. If I want a decimal number and I said I want this to be 0.6, normally you're going to have to specify that it is a float with F. Right now, I mean, normally it would underline it, but let's see if I actually do it again. 0.6. Oop. 0.6. Yeah, so now it's saying that if I go under here, it's going to say, hey, I've provided doubles. And then if I even said, well, actually, no, one will work. To make a double afloat, you just have to put F at the end of it. So if I said 0.6 F, suddenly it's fine. But I'm just going to write 0 as a whole just to make it easy, because it can take whole numbers, and when you write it as a whole number, you don't actually have to write in the decimal at all. So this is, and then this is called pitch. I'm assuming pitch is talking about the sound, but honestly, I don't really know. I just know it needs to reposition the angles. Assert summoning entity is not null. May produce null pointer exception. As long as the item entity exists, it's going to be fine. So this is basically all you need to properly summon an entity. The only thing that we need to do as well is we're going to, on top of this, let's say the world dot set block state, and then I'll say position, and then state, and then what we need to do is say, what am I changing the block? I'm changing the blocks dot error dot get default state. Boop. So now this will get rid of the block as soon as I place it, and then it's going to summon the entity. And this is so that the entity doesn't go inside of it and ends up getting some damage that's completely unnecessary. So let's summon our golem now the proper way. Alright, here we are in our beautiful world again, and if I place it, it's going to place the entity. And if you remember, it could not take, it cannot take anything in the 4 corners here. I might suffocate the entity for a bit. Yeah. Which is why they have it set like that. But it will summon the entity no matter how I place it, which is very interesting. Oh. Well, I got stuck in the birch. Well, he's going to die, so I'm going to go over here and pretend that I am not the cause of his death. But we'll place it. Bam, iron. So setting the block to air instantly gets rid of it. But now we have a proper way to summon our entity, no matter how we feel like doing it. But if I have way too many iron golems, I'll show you a command if you don't know it. So we'll do / kill, because there's way too many. I'm going to say at E, so at entity. And then I'm going to say type equals not... Actually, never mind. I was going to say not player, but that's going to kill Billy over there. So I'm going to say, I'm going to specify by saying iron golem. And that will kill all of the iron golems. And then I could probably kill the items, but after 5 minutes they'll despawn, so it's not too big of an issue. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you understand the onPlaced. I mean, literally all it is talking about the onPlaced. Everything that goes inside the code, all those specific stuff, that's when coding gets real. And I'm going to try through all these block series, I'm going to try and give you unique examples for each one, but I'm also going to try and give you literal examples in ways that I would try and use them. Honestly, onPlaced is kind of poopy. I'm I'm not a I'm not a very good way of explaining onPlaced because all it's talking about is the onPlace, and it's like, when I place it, what happens? The most practical way I could say is when you place it, it either summons, not summons thing. I mean, if I really wanted to make a house, I could make a little house, but that would be absolutely ridiculous. But it is possible. So hopefully you learned a little bit about those basics. I could see someone getting a lot of confused or having a lot of questions. So I do have some stuff I do have a comment section. So you can ask all the questions you want. I do have a Discord server as well. So if you want to join the Discord server and then just let me know that you are a coder, and then I'll give you a coder. I'll give you the coder tag, and then you and all of the other people that are in that little coding circle, we could talk about our issues. We could put them all together. We could figure it out. But uh, it's now that we're on advanced classes, and this is the first advanced class block. The first video on advanced blocks. I could see things getting a little advanced because, well, they're advanced. That's why it's called an advanced block, but they get easier with time, and the more methods you know, the more you can do, and the more you can do, the more you know. So it kind of loops in a nice loop there. So hopefully that gets all of your stuff to hopefully you get better at it. You'll get better at it. I just know you will. Especially as we have a ton and a ton of methods to do, even though the real coding is all of the stuff inside. And that's why I'm trying to give you practical stuff, and I'm trying to explain all of those practical things so that you get an idea on what you're doing. But with that in mind, yeah, that's that's gonna be it for this video. So, if you have any questions, like I said, put them in the comments below. If you want to join the server, please join the server. You can, get better help there because if you're having a coding issue, the reason why I ask people to join the server is because on the Discord, you can send me screenshots and I can see the screenshots and then I can work with you. Sometimes I'll voice chat with some of the people that are having issues, and then I work with them. You can ask people you can join the server and say, hey, is this guy for real? And they might say, sort of. He's got his problems. But that's yeah. My thing is I try my best, but you can only work with what you got. So that's gonna be it from me though. This has been quite a little bit of a long video because there was a lot to explain, but they'll get shorter with time, I'm sure. I hope. But that's going to be it from me from this video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and without further ado,